radioactive materials. Okay, so Doc Amy already discussed the details on the proper handling, safety of the animals. So a priority, of course, would be the safety of personnel, the researchers that are involved in an animal facility. So there is a gold standard or a gold reference, which is the BMBL. We call it the BMBL. This would stand for biosafety in microbiological and biomed laboratories. All the basic biosafety concepts, all the required engineering equipments, and also the planning in constructing a laboratory are all included in this reference. So I also wrote down the definition of biosafety. This was taken from BMBL. It is now on its 6th edition, recently updated in 2020, probably due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So knowing all of this, taking into account all of this, there should be a health and safety protocol. A standard operating procedure must be developed and implemented and maintained in the facility or the laboratory. And it is the responsibility of the project investigator to ensure the safety of the research staff. And I would like to emphasize, of course, that the research should be compliant with the approved conditions with the institutional biosafety committee. So in Diliman, in UP Diliman, we have what we call the UPD-IBC, which is initially tasked to evaluate project proposals involving the GMOs, and then after that, they would be endorsed to the DOS, specifically to the NCBP, or the National Committee of Biosafety in the Philippines. So that was the primary reason why the IBC was formed way back early 1990s. This was actually based on the executive order of President Corazon Aquino regarding the use of modern biotechnology procedures. Eventually, of course, we now added in the late 2013, we added additional function for the UPD-IBC, and that would include, of course, an assurance that all research proposal will not produce any environmental or any human health problems, specifically in the UP Diliman community. And we are also tasked to review and monitor the ongoing research work in UP Diliman. So what are the different research studies that we review? Of course, research projects involving recombinant or synthetic nucleic acid, transgenic organisms, biohazardous agents with potential toxic effects, and then materials with potential pathogenic effects, and select agents and biologically derived toxins. Select agents would mean, for example, would be the saxitoxins are actually toxins that derive from different biological entities, enterotoxins from bacteria. So the UP Diliman IBC is under the office of the OVCRD, UP Diliman. So This would be the details. You can easily go to the website of OBCRD, and there is a link, no, to the UPD Institutional Biosafety Committee. So these are the members of the UPD-IBC in 2019 to 2020. So unfortunately, we lost one of our members last year. So for this year, we are still finalizing the composition of the committee. There will be a change in the chair. So the new chair will be Dr. Hill Penoliar, and additional members will be included as recommended by our former chair, Dr. Vermando Aquino. Okay, so it is important that there's a collaboration between the UPD-IACUC and the UPD-IBC, and unfortunately, the task fell on my lap because I am a member of both committees. Okay, so we have support staff from the OBCRD, Miss Sophia Belen, who's also a staff of the UPD-IACUC, and we have a secretary also. So in addition to the UPD-IBC, of course, the task of the UPD-IBC would be more on the research proposals. So in 2015, our Chancellor then, Michael Tan, constituted what we call a disaster risk reduction and management, the function of which is to integrate, develop, promote, and implement DRRM plans for disaster resilience. So these are, of course, would refer not to unexpected natural or man-made disasters that would need appropriate response and management, including security of the facility. Of course, earlier there were some questions regarding the security of the animal facilities. So it is there's a structural organization. There are committees under this overall committee, subcommittees rather, and this would go down to the college level and then to the institute level. So for example, in the events of typhoons or floods or fires or even earthquakes, there are already assigned personnel responsible to secure entry to the facility. For example, there's flood, the personnel or the assigned personnel should be able to check if the animals are okay, they should be fed, they should still be maintained, even if there's some disasters going on. Okay, so that's the additional security for the facility. So let's now go to the operation of the animal lab facility. What are the basic biosafety concerns? Of course, there are research risk or hazards involved in operating an animal facility. So what do we mean by, we start of course with a risk assessment prior to an opening or prior to the operation of an animal lab facility. So what is the risk assessment is just a procedure that will identify, evaluate, and of course predict the potential occurrence of hazards to human and animal health, and of course to plan and design the mitigating measures to at least minimize the hazards. Again, this is based on the definition from BMBL. So it is a laborious process because it would involve some experts, in order for the risk assessment to be done. Is it would encompass, of course, the SOP. You have to have a standard operating procedure should be established. And then you need, of course, the first step should be to identify the risk. No? So, of course, earlier on, I've already mentioned that this can be in the form of a biological agent, a chemical agent, a physical radiation, or ultraviolet, the use of UV in research. Okay, and in the SOP, of course, would also involve the personal training and biosafety guidelines. So for the personal training, we were supposed to start training care of the UPD-IBC, but then COVID actually happened, so we weren't able to start with this activity. But in institute level, for example, every year in the Institute of Biology, before the undergrad thesis students or our graduate students, before they work in the laboratory, we usually demand, we have to require them to attend a biosafety workshop or a seminar in order for them to be apprised of the significance of biosafety. So in any research or in any operation, there will always be risk, but of course, we can always manage, we can always plan to avoid or at least to minimize the risks that are involved. Okay, and that's the significance of a risk assessment. So, of course, I already mentioned earlier that the risk assessment is a process, and the first first step is actually the identification of risk. So, if you're using a biological agent, you should be able to at least understand the biology of the agent, the transmission, and of course, if there are available treatment or therapy against the infection, or of course even the proper equipment and the containment facility involved in using such biological agent. So the main objective really is to provide the highest practical protection to the researchers, and of course to avoid the spread to the environment at the lowest practical exposure. Okay, so the second step, of course, in the risk assessment is to evaluate the risk acceptability. So there is actually a subjective portion in risk assessment, because you actually have to assume some aspects. So you have to assume that the worst case scenario can happen. So what might happen, of course, if a researcher is infected and then he goes out to the environment? Can it be transmitted to other members of the community? So all of this are taken into agent. Of course, they could be of this, of the following: the bacteria, viruses, fungi, parasites, and other zoonotic agents. You should be able to develop an SOP to address this. So for the research personnel, they should at least undergo an initial medical examination in order for them to determine if they have at least they have allergic reactions, for example, to the fur of the animals or the hair, and even skin, droppings, of course, the urine, and even the beddings that are, of course, used in the cages. Also, the personnel should also be aware of the possible metabolites that are present, for example, in the urine or the blood that will be collected from the samples or tissues. So these are the types now of samples or tissues that are collected in research. And of course, initially you don't know, for example, if you administer a plant extract, initially you don't know if you are, of course, have allergic reaction to such treatment, but later on, probably in the blood or in the urine, there will be metabolites that will be produced after the administration of these treatments. So the research personnel should be aware of the possible effects of this or the consequences of these treatments. So as in general or as basic biosafety protocol, all contaminated materials should be autoclaved, especially the infected materials or infected animals, and of course the different tissues or samples that have been collected. And it would be very good if the necropsy of infected animals can be done in a safety cabinet, a biological safety cabinet. And of course, it is very important to follow the proper disposal of biological. So these are actually just basic protocol for biosafety. So regarding personal hygiene and protection, of course, this should all be included in the standard operating procedure. The personnel should all be trained on proper animal handling techniques and biosafety practices. So in our lab, of course, all personnel, including the lab aides, they all attend the training which is held at the Natural Sciences Research Institute, BRSL. And of course, we encourage at least the use of personal protective equipment or clothing. In some laboratories, of course, they use disposable gowns. So rubber gloves, rubber boots or foot covers, surgical mask, and face shields. Now, so all the type of PPE that is used is, of course, would depend on the type of research that is being undertaken. This was also mentioned a while ago by Dr. Amy. There should be a regular disinfection of the lab in order to prevent fomites, dust, and of course the used surgical mask and rubber gloves. This could all serve as fomites. So if there's a biological agent, it can be transmitted by aerosol, can actually land on fomites, and this can be a possible source of contamination. And of course, I already mentioned a while ago that physical and medical examination of personnel is encouraged in order to determine existing medical conditions, even the allergies and the immunocompetence. course, we also encourage immunizations and booster shots. Initially, we required tetanus and rabies immunizations, but it seems we were informed that mice actually would there's no problem no with the rabies when in a mice laboratory. So now we're just focused on tetanus vaccination or tetanus immunizations. So the third factor not to consider in the safety of a facility would be the containment level. So once you identify the risk group of your biological agent, you now have to consider which biosafety level, which containment levels your lab will be. So again, there are 4, but this is not associated. No, this is not related to the risk group that I've presented earlier. So there's 4 biosafety level. Number 1, and this is the definition. Again, these are all based on the definitions from BMBL as the reference. So this containment or this lab is suitable for work involving agents of minimal potential hazard to lab personnel and the environment, and or activities or work with defined characterized strains of viable microorganisms not known to consistently cause disease in healthy adult humans. So most of this would be the RG, the risk group 1 biological agent, and then a biosafety level 2. This is suitable for work involving agents of moderate potential hazard to personnel and the environment. The difference is that these agents would relate to accidental percutaneous or mucous membrane exposure or ingestion of infectious material. Number 3, biosafety level 3. This is applicable to facilities in which work is conducted with indigenous or exotic agents that may cause serious or potentially lethal disease as a result of exposure by the inhalation route. Okay, so that's the difference between 2 and 3. And then for number 4, this is a containment facility required for work with dangerous and exotic agents that pose a high individual risk of life-threatening disease, aerosol transmission, or related agents having unknown treatment or preventative measures. Okay. So these are just pictures that would show us the difference between a safety level 1, a safety level 2, and safety level 3, and safety level 4 containment facility. As you can see, for safety level 1, most activities can be done on an open bench setting, while for safety level 2, there is now a need for a biological safety cabinet. At least that's the difference between a safety level 1 and safety level 2. On safety level 3, there's now at least the BSC, the biological safety cabinet, is now enclosed. So as you can see, the researcher is protected. While for safety level 4, usually for this containment facility, there should always be pairs. So when they go inside the facility, they should be in pair, and they use positive pressure suits, just like what you see in this picture. So these are now the features of specific animal lab related to the biosafety level. So similarly, there are 4 levels. No? So in UP Diliman, we only have the ABSL level 1. So what are the features of the animal biosafety level 1? So of course, the biological agents that are used are well characterized, just like what I mentioned earlier. The agents are not known to cause disease among healthy immunocompetent adults. Treatment is available, and the open bench procedure, just like what I've shown earlier, is allowed. So the animals are in an open cage system, and the animals should be free, from zoonotic diseases. Of course, Doc Amy mentioned in her presentations that you should have a reliable source, for healthy animals. So your animals should not carry zoonotic diseases, and of course, you need to practice good lab practices. These are the basic protocols. There should be regular hand washing, daily decontamination of materials. That is why an autoclave is also required, and of course cleaning of workbench before and after any activities. So this is for on top of the features that were mentioned earlier for ABS level 1. These are additional biosafety precautions specific for animal biosafety level 2. So of course, very important would be the restrictions. There should be a restricted access. So only authorized researchers should be allowed, and there should be a proper signages on the entry doors. Usually there is a logbook on the entry door, and of course the SOP should be displayed so that anyone who would enter the facility can of course go through the SOP. So of course there's always provisions for safe sharp policies. Again, these are important provisions in the SOP, especially the sharps. So the gloves, gowns, uniforms, or lab coats should be worn in the rooms and removed prior to exit. Again, we emphasize the use of face protection and the use of biosafety cabinets to confine procedures that would involve aerosol. Another difference for the animal biosafety level 2 would be the possible use of filtered cages. So for the ABSL1, you can use open cages, but for ABSL2, you have the option to use a closed system for the cages of animals. Of course, the autoclave should be available, and there should be a hand washing sink in the animal room itself. Okay. So this, again, on top of the features of the ABSL level 2, these are additional features that should be present in the animal biosafety level 3. So, of course, this should be very taken seriously, all these provisions. Some of these have already been mentioned by Dr. Amy, of course, when she discussed some planning of the animal facility. Of course, you have, of course, the option to use BSc Biological Safety Cabinet 3 for this containment facility. So these are additional features of an animal biosafety level 3. So now you have a ducted exhaust ventilation system. So these are additional barriers. So for animal biosafety level 3 and 4, you have a primary barriers that would be the biological safety cabinet and the cages for the animals. But there are additional engineering features, of course, that would involve the ventilation system and, of course, the inclusion of HEPA filters for airflow and other engineering features that were earlier described, including, of course, the air showers, the anteroom, of course, and the changing rooms and dressing rooms. So this would be for the animal biosafety level 4. Of course, earlier I already mentioned the significance of positive pressure suits that are used, and class 3 biosafety cabinet would be very important for researchers that are working in a animal biosafety level 4 containment facility. Should have a regular medical and physical checkup, and including, of course, program would include a post-exposure counseling and prophylaxis. Okay, so again, these are additional engineering requirements on top of the those features that were mentioned in the other animal biosafety levels containments. So all of this for the animal biosafety level 1 to 4 should require the clearance from from the IACUC and, of course, the biosafety committee. So lastly, of course, hazardous effects, those involved in research, can be minimized or avoided if we follow if we develop an appropriate standard operating procedures that would, of course, include hygienic practices, which are enumerated here or listed here, and, of course, the general operational practices, such as the proper use of protective PPEs, and, of course, you have to plan the activities of your work. So prior to starting or prior to a specific activity, you should be able to read the available resources, the guidelines, the SOP, and the MSDS of the agents that you use. So I would like to refer you to this. This is the this is considered as the code of practice, or the gold standard regarding on the biosafety concepts, the code of practice. This is the biosafety in microbiological and biomedical laboratories, published by the CDC and NIH. It is now on its 6th edition. Just like what I've mentioned earlier, this is used by the industry and, of course, by the clinical and research labs. You can download this from this. You have a link. We have a link here. You can download this freely from this link. And with that, I would like to thank you for listening. Of course, earlier on, Dr. Blanca mentioned that safe and healthy animals would lead to good science. So in addition to safe and healthy animals, of course, the priority would be the safety and health of personnel. So both animals and personnel should be safe and healthy in order to produce valid and good science. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Katap. So now we'll have the continuation of this talk. Let's listen to Dr. Hernandez.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Good. Okay. Okay. So good morning, everyone. So I'm Christine Hernandez. I'm a faculty member of the Institute of Chemistry, UPD Liman, and also a member of the UPD-IBC. So I will continue. So this is now the second half of the occupational health and safety in an animal facility. So again, Dr. Katap has already stressed the importance of being safe in the lab. So I added this, you can say, subtitle. So it's better to be safe in the lab than sorry. So, and I'm sure that you are already aware of the importance of working safe, so of being safe in the lab. So remember, you are not responsible for not just for your own safety, but for the other people working close to you. Okay, so I will cover the following topics with you. So hazards, so classified as physical and those associated with radiation, and learn about waste disposal, which is also important. So again, it is very important to identify the hazards when working in the lab, determine the appropriate health and safety measures needed, okay, and learn the proper waste disposal, okay. So what is hazard? So this is a condition or set of circumstances that present potential harm to the health of a person. So as mentioned earlier by Dr. Katap, so she mentioned about the risk, right? So what is the likelihood now of the hazards causing harm to the individual, okay? So you have two categories. So those that could lead to occupational illnesses are your health hazards, and those that may cause physical harm or injuries are your safety hazards, okay? So the process of identifying all hazards in the workplace is primary to eliminating hazards or controlling the risk, okay? So as mentioned earlier. So that is the best way to reduce workplace injury and illness, okay? So how do you identify them? So through observation, so by reading the material safety data sheet, so via survey or employing a professional who will carry out a safety audit for you, okay? So now we go to the physical hazards. So these are the potential sources of physical hazards and physical injuries. So in the laboratory, so they may include animal bites, scratches, so slipping and falling on wet floors, handling of sharps and needles. Now, how do we eliminate this? So good housekeeping, so again, is essential in the lab to ensure everyone's safety and the integrity of your work, okay? So you have to maintain a clean and well-organized lab area. So it's a primary component of a safe lab environment. So all of us are working in the lab. So some of the points or the points that I've been mentioning here, it's not a foreign concept to you. So we are already practicing this. So some of this might just serve as a reminder, okay? So when it's already safe to go back in our lab, we can just check, okay, if we are compliant, okay? So again, the lab must be kept clean, so organized, so and free of clutter, okay? So you have to clean your benchtop areas as well as your fume hoods. So remember, your proper airflow is critical to the operation of your fume hood. So you have to clean out and defrost your freezers on a regular basis. So you have to dispose, empty, okay, or treat waste. So more on that later. So it's important that you do not allow waste to accumulate. So sharps, broken glassware should be placed in properly labeled puncture-proof containers. Okay? So do not block electrical panels and switches. So aisles and exits must be free of obstructions. So maintain access to your emergency equipment. So you have your safety showers in the lab, so your eye washes, the exits, so fire extinguishers, your first aid kits, and also your spill kits. So it's very important that you clean up spills immediately. So including water drips. No, accidents may also be due to trip hazards. So improperly stored chemicals and faulty equipment. So you have to check regularly electrical cords and plugs to make sure they are not damaged or frayed. So you have to store gas cylinders upright. So if you're going to use CO2, right? So to in your lab facility, so they have to be secured and chained. Okay, so remember, any injury or accident should be immediately reported to the principal investigator. So as previously mentioned by Dr. Kata. Okay? So obviously, this does not bring you joy. Okay? So you can say you need to Marie Kondo your lab. Okay? So keep your work area free of unnecessary items. Okay? So you have to keep your workspace tidy, and remember to clear up after yourself. So don't expect others to clear up after you. So gusto rin nila clear yung bench, di ba? Kahit yung katabing bench, gusto nila malinis yon. So better to do a weekly housekeeping check. So and it would be good to designate 1 day a month at least to clean and organize your lab. Okay, so good housekeeping not only eliminates fire hazards and maintaining access to emergency equipment, but it also allows lab with small areas to make the most efficient use of the limited space. So which is usually the case for us, no? So usually maliliit yung labs natin. So remember, a tidy lab is a safer lab. So safety is not an add-on, but it should be an integral part of your work. So everyone who works in the lab, so you have to do your share, okay, in maintaining a clean and organized work area. Okay? So now, what are the physical hazards when working with lab animals? So research personnel handling animals face more risk from physical hazards. So as you can read from here, as enumerated here, than they do from other hazards. So safety programs in your institution should focus on the prevention of these hazards as well. Okay, so usually heavy lifting and awkward postures are part of the daily work. Okay, so more strains and awkward postures. So an administrative control would be to prevent the use of the top and bottom for storage. Okay, so you need to provide low stools with wheels for handling the cages on the bottom row. So usually yung taas, lalo na pag ako yan, maliit ako, hindi ko maaabot, no? So equipment selection is important and ergonomic factors must be considered. So and the end user should be involved in the equipment selection and training process. So the end user should be engaged. Okay, so as mentioned by Doc Amy earlier, right? So sinasama na kaagad dun sa planning. So even in the choice of equipment, so very important. So the movement of heavy equipment, so that's usual for the animal facility. So you also need to watch out for yung sharp edges and path of sight. So these are all factors that could lead to potential injury in the workplace. Okay? Now, what about chemical hazards? So I'm a chemist, so siguro I would talk more on this. So the reason to be concerned about the exposures we face in our lab, so it's because exposure to your hazardous chemicals can result in acute or chronic health effects. Okay, so acute effects could occur within hours or days of the time of exposure to a hazardous chemical or agent. So an example would be hydrochloric acid, diba? So it has vapors which could cause immediate upper respiratory irritation. So you can suffer acute health effects from almost any contaminant if you are exposed to high levels. So as in the case of a spill, okay? So exposure may also cause burns, chafing of the skin, or dermatitis. So chronic effects may occur after exposure to chemical over many years. Okay, so yung constant exposure. So a chronic effect could be cancer, liver or kidney problems, or reproductive difficulties. So for example, so formaldehyde, right? So it's a common reagent in the lab. So it's a carcinogen and an organic solvent. So it can cause liver damage. So pag constant din yung exposure, okay, the skin can also become sensitized to the chemical. So meaning you will have a reaction even if you're just exposed to smaller quantity. Okay. So one of the most important safety practices in the lab is proper chemical storage. Okay. So safe chemical storage. So this is a necessity. Okay. So be especially aware of old chemicals. So how do you think your lab would fare, okay, if your chemical storage is surveyed? Okay, so we have to check. So why do we need to be concerned? So why is storage important? Okay, so a recent catastrophic event, I'm sure, I don't know if you have heard of this, is the Beirut's ammonium nitrate blast. Okay, so it killed, which killed at least 220 people. So injured more than 5,000 and left an estimated 300,000 people homeless. So what was the cause? So it was caused by 6 million pounds of ammonium nitrate. So it has been stored for 6 years at a port warehouse, no? So according to reports, the stored ammonium nitrate exploded as a result of fire. So providing sufficient heat to detonate the explosive. So ang isang tinitignan nila is the improper storage of the large quantities of ammonium nitrate. So coupled with the conditions in the vicinity, so it unfortunately resulted to the largest non-military conventional explosion to date. Okay, so there are lots of points to make about safe chemical storage. Okay, so you can read them from the list here. Okay, so about regarding incompatible chemicals. Okay, so of course you do not store them near heat or sunlight. Okay, so don't store your chemicals in the food or acids on metal shelves. And of course, don't store anything on the floor, especially glass bottles, lalo na limited yung ating space. Okay, so you have to consider that. So another safe lab practice is conducting an inventory, okay, of the chemicals that are actually in the lab. Okay, so discontinued experiments, purchasing practices, or lack of personnel or time may result in the storage of large quantities of chemicals. So this frequently results, so ang ano niyan, long-term storage of chemicals that are no longer needed, no? So you have to maintain an accurate chemical inventory. So this will prevent storage of excessive volumes of chemicals and storage of dangerous, unstable chemicals. Okay? So once you have an inventory of the chemicals in your lab, so the next step is to make sure that you have the correct information on them. Okay? So another safety standard, okay, is the hazard communication, a hazard communication standard siya. So, or yung the right to know na sinatawag nila. So this standard requires that all containers must be labeled, so with the specific information, okay, so including the chemical name and physical and health hazard, the name and address of manufacturer, as well as emergency contact numbers. Okay? So ano ba yung pag minsan nangyayari sa lab natin, no? Many times secondary containers are left unlabeled, okay? So which results in disposal problems, okay? So the composition of the unknown waste must be identified usually through the services of an outside analytical laboratory. Okay? So such service are often quite expensive. So labeling all the containers, so it's a good practice. So you have to do it. Okay, so parate yan, no exception. So reagent bottles labels should have a list of all the substances in that solution. So anyone who finds a bottle on the bench with just names such as solution 1, solution 2, solution A, solution B, diba? Will not know what is in it and will not be aware of any risk involving that solution. Okay? So occupational health and safety hazard communication standard. Okay? So this requires that every chemical have an MSDS, and this must be available to all employees. So as mentioned by Dr. Katap earlier. Okay? So kung merong bago sa lab, okay, or kung meron kayong bagong na-procure, kailangan may MSDS, and all the personnel should be informed and trained. Okay? So the MSDS should include this information, okay? Product identity, hazardous ingredients, the physical data, fire and explosion hazard data, reactivity data, okay? So as well as your health hazard data, precautions for safe handling and use, and control measures, okay? So remember, meron din mga MSDS na hindi properly prepared. So some manufacturers don't do a good job. Okay, so you have to also watch out for that. Okay, and then you have radiation and UV. Okay, so the UV sources in the lab, so they emit high intensities of UV light. Okay, which can produce painful eye and skin burns. Okay, so you have here the possible sources. Okay, in the laboratory, so you have your trans illuminators. Okay. Cross-linkers, germicidal lamps in the biosafety cabinet, and handheld UV lamps, okay? So the eyes are the most vulnerable organ to UV exposure, okay? So exposure may lead to photokeratitis, which is not felt until after several hours, okay? So this is very painful and would feel like having sand in your eyes, okay? So it also causes an aversion to bright light, and may last up to 48 hours. So may long-term effects din siya. Okay? The skin is somewhat less sensitive to UV. Okay? So, however, excessive exposure may lead to redness, swelling, pain, and blistering of skin. Okay? So, it is easy to recover from short-term skin damage, but chronic exposure may increase your risk of cancer. Okay? So what are the recommended PPE? So this was already mentioned earlier. So you need the fully buttoned lab coat, okay, long pants, closed-toe shoes, okay. So make sure that all skin is protected, okay. So use disposable latex or nitrile gloves to protect exposed skin on the hands. So wear a full face shield to protect the eyes and the face. So you also have to check if your polycarbonate face shield has a UV certification, okay? So, and then you have to, of course, turn off the UV light before working in the cabinet, okay? So there are ways that we can protect ourselves from these types of exposures, and some ways are preferred over the others. Okay, so this was I think mentioned earlier. So you have the engineering and the administrative controls. Okay, so for protection, for worker protection. Okay, so when you say engineering control, so this removes the hazard or separates it from the person and helps prevent exposure. So these are the examples here. So substitution, isolation, or enclosure of a process, okay, like local exhaust ventilation and your fume hoods, diba? General ventilation and safety, okay? Safety cans for flammable storage rather than glass bottles, okay? So, and of course, you have your PPE, okay? So PPE is last on the list because this only protects you and not the others in the lab. Okay. So then you have your administrative control. So generally, this involves a procedure that limits worker contact with the hazard. Okay. So it includes limiting the time allowed for certain tasks. So you have job rotation and of course, good housekeeping procedures. So training is also an administrative control and should be used in combination with the engineering control. So as mentioned by Dr. Katap earlier, so there are trainings that should be given regularly. So usually we do safety and emergency drills at the beginning of an academic year. So for RAs, okay, for research personnel, okay. So even if you have made these changes, okay, you have to ensure that they are tested as well. Okay, so we want to be sure that the risk is minimized and no new hazard is created. Okay, and then so finally we go to the waste disposal. Okay, so hazardous waste, so it poses a serious threat to people in the workplace. Okay, so it would be good to follow a cradle to grave approach. So what does that mean? So the generator of the waste should be knowledgeable and responsible in disposing the waste it produces. Okay, so you need waste generator registration, okay, in order for you to get a DENR ID number. Okay, so the waste generators are required. So you have to notify the DENR of the type and quantity of waste generated. You have to provide them with so regular to no on a quarterly basis the information as to the type and quantity of the hazardous waste generated, okay, kung ano yung napoproduce and kung ano yung tinatransport outside by your professional treater. Okay, so you have to be responsible for the waste, okay, in your premises until they are transferred or delivered to the treater. Okay, so you have to prepare, okay, and submit the document covering comprehensive emergency contingency plans. So to mitigate spills and accidents involving your hazardous waste. So again, so as mentioned earlier, you have to train regularly your staff. Okay, so these are the requirements for proper hazardous waste management. So you have to designate a pollution control officer, which should be accredited. So you have to comply with the storage requirements. You have to comply with pre-transport requirements and use of authorized transporters. Okay, so you have to comply with waste transport or yung manifest system and use of recognized treaters. So you can check the accredited waste treaters from the DENR website. And for your record, you have to get the completion of treatment disposal from your treater. So sila yung magbibigay sa inyo nun, yung certificate of treatment. Okay? So we need to be careful with waste disposal. So think about the people who will handle the waste. So your technical staff, diba? Yung cleaners, contractors. So think about the environment. Where will the waste end up? Diba? So can this chemical be put down the sink? So important, so do not put sharps in ordinary waste bins or dispose chemicals such as organic solvents down the sink. Okay? Your chemicals must be disposed of in ways that avoid harm to people and the environment. Okay? So the methods of disposal must be aligned with the rules and regulations of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. Okay? So again, only a duly licensed commercial waste disposal firm can be contracted for service. Okay, so your waste container should be leak-proof and equipped with tight-fitting lids. Okay, so your hazardous waste must be rendered safe. So by sterilization, containment, or other appropriate means before disposal. Okay, so waste disposal, like your storage, so it also requires this. So the same thing, no? Proper storage, proper labeling, pre-planning, and record keeping. So the temporary storage of your biological and your chemical waste are no different than those that you use for the storage of your usual reagents. So the most important rule is to make sure that any chemicals or waste that are stored together are compatible with each other. Okay? The storage area or your temporary containment area for your waste should be in a separate area from the lab. Okay? So proper labeling is very important. So labels should be dated and attached to the bottles containers as soon as you begin to collect the waste. So enlist the complete name, okay, of the reagents. So make sure to completely remove, okay, the old labels to avoid any confusion as to the contents. Okay, if there is no label on a container, so again, the composition of unknown waste must be identified kasi hindi yan i-collect ng inyong treater. So yun, very expensive to identify unlabeled waste. Okay, so such services are often quite expensive. So very important dyan yung pre-planning. So know what waste you're creating prior to carrying out experiments. Okay, consideration of the means of disposal of waste should be part of the planning of all the experiments before you carry them out. Okay, so usually the cost of disposing excess, okay, and waste chemicals, so it has become extremely expensive. So na-exceed niya na yung original cost of the chemical. Okay, so also whenever practical, order the minimum amount of materials. Okay, so in order to avoid the accumulation of large stocks of excess chemicals, so which frequently end up becoming safety hazards due to decomposition or damage. Okay, and then you have record keeping. Okay, so records of waste chemicals on hand must be maintained. So in addition, records must also be kept of those chemicals that have been picked up for disposal. Okay, so at a minimum, the name of the person responsible, the identity or description of the waste, the amount, the date designated as waste, and the date of pickup must be included in the records. Okay. Waste are considered hazardous, so if they are listed under yung classification of prescribed hazardous waste. Okay, so may procedural manual yung sa DENR, which you can actually search in the web. Okay, so there are 4 characteristics for it to be classified as such. So dapat ignitable, corrosive, reactive, or toxic. Okay, so in the case of the biological waste, okay, animal biological waste contaminated with chemicals, so yung inyong lab mice, rats, etc., they are all considered as M501. So they are classified under miscellaneous waste. So I think there are 12 or 13 classifications. So last yung biological waste. So again, this must be adequately sterilized and contained prior to removal and disposal. So the burying method is not implemented in the university for its biological waste. So this should be disposed using an accredited waste disposal firm. Okay. So for example, you have your mice specimen. So you put them in a Ziploc plastic, and any excess parts of the plastic should be secured with a masking tape. Okay. The plastic containing the mice should be labeled with, so your name of the waste generator, date when the waste was generated. Okay. So this type of waste will be stored in the animal room freezer. Okay. So until the date of hauling. So the person in charge should provide a logbook which will be used to monitor the amount of waste generated. So a record, so a sample can be found at the bottom left part of the screen. Okay. And then the RA, okay, should report immediately to the pollution control officer and a joint affidavit of okay. So finally, it would be convenient to prepare a quick reference as shown here. Okay. So more importantly, it would be ideal to come up with a waste management system manual. Okay. So which will cover the segregation of the waste, waste minimization. Okay. So transfer of waste from the labs to the containment area. So inventory, proper labeling, handling of biological waste, as well as the duties and the personnel involved. Okay, so yung pollution control officer, your safety officer, and the as well as the building administrator. Okay, so that's it for my presentation. So again, it is better to be safe in the lab than sorry. So thank you and good morning.
Thank you, Dr. Cheech, for that very informative lecture. So again, so can we have Dr. Katap and Dr. Hernandez on the screen for the question and answer portion of our program? So I have two questions in the Q&A panel. First question, I think this is addressed to Dr. Katap. Can we have a sample list of studies that can be conducted at biosafety level 1